Yes, so a very good afternoon to everybody, and thank you so much for taking out the time and joining us for this webinar. So before Mr. Ashwin will move ahead and begin the webinar, just a quick things. This session will be for 45 minutes. Then after we are done with the session, we will have 15 minutes for the Q&A. Before the Q&A, we will run a quick poll, and then we'll have a Q&A session for the next 15 minutes. So if you have any doubts, you have any questions, regarding this webinar and the topic, you can see a Q&A boxes there. You can put in your questions there, and in those 15 minutes, your questions will be answered. So this is how we are going to go through. And now Mr. Ashwin can carry on with the webinar.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, everybody, for joining in, wherever you are in this part of the world. It may be morning, afternoon, evening. Welcome again. And we will start with the introduction as part of the PPT itself, right? So let me share the PPT in the presentation mode, and then we will take it from here. So our topic for today is the cloud CSA STAR level 2 compliance with the use of SOC 2 and CCM 4 version, which is the latest from Cloud Security Alliance. And last month we had a session on similar topic, but instead of SOC 2, it was ISO 27001 route. So we will discuss that in the session today. Today's agenda is a quick introduction, the context of cybersecurity, the SOC backgrounds, the CCM4 controls, and the CSA STAR, and attestation and the registration with CSA to achieve the level 2 compliance with the use of SOC reports. That's the session, the agenda today, and I'll quickly run through our introduction first in the video. So that was a quick introduction about our company, and as you've seen, we are a Denver, Colorado-based CPA firm with office in Denver and Mumbai, in India. We've got clients across the globe in Asia Pacific, North America, India, Europe, everywhere, right? I am Ashwin. I am the CEO of SEDR. I am in this industry for about 19 years into audits, IT security and cybersecurity audits, with total industry experience of about 36 years. I'm qualified MBA and CPA and hold cybersecurity certifications such as CITP, CISP, CISA, CISM, and so on. So we have been doing 5 years full-time SOC 2 audits since the year 2017, and cloud security has been our major focus point. And our company totally engages in data security and privacy audits only. We don't do anything else. This is a full-time business. And most of these cybersecurity aspects we take care of in terms of the audits. Some of the clients that we work on with, some of those are well-known names. Some of them are small names who are maybe small companies in comparison. And I mean, those were startups earlier, but now they have become medium-sized company. And we have been auditing them for last 5 years from SOC 2 perspective. We also recently became an ISO certification body, and now we also do the ISO 27001 and other data security and privacy audits. So the context here is the cloud services market is growing. It's expected to be $1 trillion. 93% of the enterprises already have a multi-cloud strategy, and the pandemic has helped the use of cloud services, which is accelerating now. The cybercrime market also is increasing. It poised to be about $10.5 trillion by 2025, about 4 to 5 times the size of our Indian GDP. Along with the increase of digital use, cloud, and digital transformation, what is happening across all the companies with e-commerce and everything growing. We also see 140% data breaches on a year-to-year. This is for 19 to 20, but we always see a 100+% increase on an average data breaches also. So the issue is, while the economy is growing, maybe the controls are not growing, or the digital economy is growing at a faster pace, and that's the reason we see some of the large data breaches. Some of the issues also are not are due to no proper controls. Companies are growing, putting up their applications on the cloud without doing proper VAPT or configuration management or a baseline, and just for the sake of getting to the market faster, they are pushing their applications into the cloud without doing a security checks in place, right? We also see some of the privacy fines, which is there in the public. The Facebook with 5 billion, and Equifax 700 million, British Airways, Uber, Marriott, and Yahoo, and Google for YouTube, etc. So these are some of the big numbers in terms of data security and privacy, and that's the reason we see that companies want to comply and improve their controls to make sure that the compliances are there and the data breaches do not happen if controls are there, right? So that's the whole idea. So the best tools for managing third-party data security and compliance is the SOC reports, also known as the ISAE reports in the Europe side, the ISO IEC 27000 series of certifications, such as the 27001, 27017, 18, 701, which is privacy, etc. We also see a lot of privacy related mandates coming up, and companies trying to include privacy criteria as part of their SOC 2 compliances, and covering even the HIPAA and other healthcare data from a SOC 2 perspective. So the cloud security CCM and C5 controls are also available to include as part of SOC reports or the ISO certifications. PCI DSS is used for cardholder data, and again the SOC 2 plus CCM can be used for covering the cloud CSA STAR certification, which is our topic today. So before we get into the CCM4 and what is CSA and how does the CSA STAR certification help you, we'll quickly look at the SOC 2, what SOC 2 is and what's the history with the SOC 2. Starting in 1974, it was started as SAS 3 and then moved out to SAS 44, SAS 70, and then Web Trust, Systrust, and so on until 2011, when SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3 became very popular, and they were transformed into SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3 for different use applications. So that's the history, and since 2011, there's no change in the nomenclature. Of course, there has been additions for SOC for cybersecurity in 2017, and then SOC for supply chain in 2020. This is from AICPA. So we all know that the SOC 2 uses the trust services criteria, which is aligned to the COSO risk framework, right? And we have 5 criterias in the SOC 2. The first criteria is security, also known as the common criteria, which has about 300 points of focus, aligned under the 9 aspects which are linked to the COSO risk framework. The first one is control environment. The second is communication and information. The third is risk assessment. The fourth is monitoring activities. Fifth is control activities. Sixth is logical and physical access controls. Seventh is system operations. Eighth is change management. Ninth is risk mitigation. Now, if you see out of these 300 odd points of focus, so we call them points of focus, unlike the ISO where we call them control objectives. So these are points of focus as aligned to the COSO risk framework. And if you see out of these 300, 3 major areas are risk assessment, monitoring of those risks, and risk mitigation. So and the control activities also. So all these 4 aspects put together out of 9 control for almost 30 to 40% of your entire controls, which is based on risk management life cycle. That is what COSO framework is actually talking about, right? And they are aligning to make sure that not only do a risk assessment, but you make sure you have your metrics of measurement to monitor your risks and to make sure all the risks are mitigated. In the previous sessions, I've spoken a lot about doing a metrics of measurement and doing a PDCA cycle. So today I'm not going to focus more on that. Some of our earlier recordings are available on YouTube. Maybe you can take a look on our channel and check them out, right? Some of the SOC reports for security, for privacy, and cloud also are there on YouTube. Maybe you can have a look and get some more insights. But today we are going to cover specifically the CCM, CSA STAR, and getting the CSA STAR level 2 compliance with use of SOC reports. So SOC 2s also have a concept, both SOC 1, SOC 2 both have the concept of type 1 and type 2. Type 1 report is for a point in time, that is as of today, that is controls are designed and implemented as of today's date, or whatever is the date of reporting. The type 2, on the other hand, covers minimum 6 months and maximum 12 months period for reporting on not only the type 1, which is design and implementation of controls, but also the operating effectiveness of controls. So here in the type 2, we are talking that the controls what were implemented are operating effectively, and that makes the SOC 2 type 2 more difficult and more time consuming because it covers a period of minimum 6 months and maximum 12 months. So it works like a annual profit and loss balance sheet kind of a environment where every year you have to have a SOC 2 report, type 2 report generally. So generally type 1 is used for a point in time, which is the first time users when they implement the controls, they generally go for type 1. But on a year-on-year basis, the type 2 is used. And of course, you may have it for minimum 6 months or maximum 12 months. But at least every 12 months, you will need to get a new attest report, which is a SOC 2 type 2. So SOC 2 Type 2 also uses the description criteria. Like in the ISO 27001, we have a statement of applicability. Here, the SOC 2 attestation starts with the description criteria, also known as a description of controls, right? And the ASCP has its guidelines to all the entities to provide the description in a certain format. This format is DC1 to DC9 that takes care of most of the requirements, starting from the type of services provided, the principal service commitments, the components of the services, which is the infrastructure, software, people, procedures, and data, and then the details of the identified incidents. So it is mandatory for every company to inform the breaches happened in the last 6 months or 1 year of the reporting period in case there be. So it is mandatory in case you have a data breach. It is mandatory for you to inform the data breaches from transparency perspective to your customers. And then the DC5 talks about the applicable trust services criteria. Out of the 5 that we just saw, what are the applicable controls or the criteria that you're reporting on, right? And then the controls would be implemented by user entity. So always the end users also need to do some part of the security, specifically in a B2B environment. And those are some of the controls that are addressed in the description criteria. DC7 talks about sub-service organizations, like if you have any third parties whom you are depending on to provide your services, those can also be included as part of your SOC 2 report. And then we need to also justify any specific criterion that is not being reported on. For example, privacy or processing integrity. If it is not applicable to your environment, we just need to put a small justification as to why we are not including in the scope of the SOC 2. And then the DC9 talks about the relevant changes. So if there have been any changes as part of the yearly upgrades into the system, if the infrastructure changes, database changes, or major changes per se, they need to be informed as part of the SOC 2 report also. So the scope is one of the most important factors in determining SOC 2. SOC 2 is not just a certificate, it is an attest report. So we need to clearly define, if you're going for the first time, we need a type 1 or a type 2 report. If it's a type 2, then what is the period of reporting, 6 months or 12 months or whatever in between also is fine. Then what are the business processes that we are looking at to report on? or specific application. If we are talking of cloud, we're talking of SaaS applications per se, or we're talking of a database environment which offers IaaS as a service per se, or a PaaS, platform as a service, either way. And then what is the number of people involved in each processes, right? How big is the environment? How many servers? How many applications? How many APIs? How many interfaces to third parties, etc. All those would be coming as part of the scoping itself. And then the process documentation, is this you have a high level policies and procedures to take care of the security, and other aspects from a risk management perspective, from a monitoring perspective, from an incident management perspective, from a privacy perspective, PIA or DPIA, whatever the case may be, right? And then what are the locations in scope? So how many locations provide those services? So all these factors will be considered as part of the scope. There's no standard pricing or there's no price list per se for a SOC 2 report, right? It is determined based on the scope of every project or every engagement. So some of the parameters to be considered for processing integrity or privacy is that also, unlike ISO, you have a CIA. So CIA in the ISO terms does not mean the same thing in terms of SOC 2, right? Because in SOC 2, we are talking of processing integrity and not just integrity of the entire systems in place. We are talking about specific data sets and whether the output is correctly determined based on the processing of that data, specific data, right? Companies may have hundreds of databases, right? So if all of those databases or data sets in scope, we need to list down every single database in scope or every output in scope that requires a assurance on the output of that data, right? So how many data sets in scope, how many input sources, how many fields, how many people involved, what is the process documentation, and what is the output parameters, locations in scope, etc., will be part of processing integrity or privacy, because both of them are relating to databases, data sets, and metadata in the data set itself, right? So a lot of companies ask us, we want a standard price and we want to include all five criteria, processing integrity, privacy, without providing any details. So if some companies are doing it or some others are trying to attest without understanding that scope, I would like to clarify to all of you that that is incorrect in nature, right? You cannot have a blanket permit of processing integrity or privacy without understanding what data sets are in scope, what are the specific applications in scope, what are the specific areas in scope, and all of those will have to be considered in the detail of understanding a scope. Many large companies also, we find that they do not provide this information to us and want a blanket pricing for doing processing integrity or privacy, which is absolutely incorrect in understanding of what processing integrity or privacy means from a SOC 2 perspective, right? So we are only looking at, right, what needs to be audited or attested in terms of the data, specific data sets. So without specific data sets, again, we will not be able to provide from our side any specific pricing without understanding the scope. So coming to CCM controls and CSA STAR, right? So the cycle for preparing for SOC attestation is something like this. If you've seen the earlier slide, this is all of the 9 areas where the trust services criteria for security is looking at, right? And above that circle is the COSO framework, which talks about governance and culture, talks of strategy and objective setting, talks about performance evaluation, talks of revision and review and revision, and talks of information, communication, and reporting areas. So these are the major areas which the COSO framework and the trust services criteria framework for SOC 2, insist that companies do that in this fashion, right? So control environment up to risk mitigation is what we saw in the earlier slide, and this is depicted in a graphical manner for understanding purposes. So preparing for SOC 2 attestation against a CCM. So as we saw earlier that the scope needs to be clearly defined, right? So if we are having all the 5 trust service criteria or we are having only security criteria. So for everybody's attention is that only the common criteria or the security category is mandatory. So all the 5 criteria are not mandatory. If you see even the SOC 2 reports of larger companies, well-known companies, you may see that all the SaaS companies, specifically cloud and companies, right, do not report on all the 5 criteria. So do not think that if you're not reporting on all the 5 criteria, you're doing something different or you're doing something wrong. It is not the case. And do not try to chew more than what you can digest. So my sincere suggestion and opinion to everybody, those who are going for the first time, is do not try to increase the scope what you cannot implement or prove for operating effectiveness. Start slow. Start with security criteria only, or if you're a cloud environment, start with availability or confidentiality. We do not recommend that first time when you start with all the 5. It is not easy subject, right? It is not an easy subject. Privacy and processing integrity are not easy subjects. Privacy takes 4 times more effort than security also. And that is the reason you see millions and billions of dollars of fine. Specifically, if you own an application, it is not an easy subject. Let me reiterate this again and again. Do not, just because you have a privacy policy and you have a cookie policy, that does not mean you are privacy compliant. That is just a starting point. Especially if you're an application owner, if you're a SaaS owner, do not jump onto privacy easily, right? This is based on my 5 years experience. We have audited several companies, large and medium scale, for privacy. And in our experience, whenever smaller companies try to force us to include privacy, we have seen that at the last moment, they drop privacy, even after including in the initial stages. So because it is difficult to comply, because you need to go through the entire privacy impact assessment and the data protection, the controllers, the processor space, and all of the data sets which are in scope, it takes a lot of time, right? For you to understand the data flows, make the data flow diagrams, do an impact assessment, and then look at the controls that you need to implement from a privacy perspective, from the entire data lifecycle management perspective. So please take my word, take my advice, and start small. It's best to start small and be transparent and be truthful to what you have. Even if you don't want to have it, if you're trying to portray that you have it, it's not going to do any good for you or for the auditors either, right? So be faithful to your customers, be transparent to your customers, whatever you have, right? That is the whole objective. So depending on what the scope is, even if it is security only as a control, you can still add the cloud CCM 4 version into the scope of work, and we can attest to that from security perspective and the CCM 4 perspective, right? So we will include those CCM 4 controls as part of the same report after the trust services criteria, which is also the common criteria. So the STAR attestation program is based on the combined requirements of the CCM4 and the trust services criteria, which is the 2017 version. The scope must satisfy the TSC criteria, security criteria, category and the CCM controls. The security category must be evaluated, right, to include all activities as reported to the cloud system. The scope of the reported system must be specific to SOC 2 report under the management assertion. And the version of the CCM is version 3, which is the old version. But now, starting December and July 2022, it is going to be mandatory to use only the version 4. And that is the reason we are promoting to make sure that you use version 4 and not version 3, which is going to be obsolete after December 2021. So the CCM version 4 is the most updated framework, which has the 17 security domains, talking from audit and assurance, application and interface security, identity and access management, and up to the endpoint management. So this is available for you to download free from CSA's website, and I will not run into the details, but I'm just giving you this information at a high level. Um, Again, the audit and assurance has about 6 controls. Application and interface security, AIS, has 7. Business continuity management has 11. The maximum is data center security is 15. Then data security and privacy lifecycle management is 19 controls. So, which is the one of the most important areas, data security and privacy lifecycle, and that is where major companies fail even today, right, on those controls. Governance, risk and compliance is 8, and HR is standard like in ISO and others. And identity and access management is again very important, which has got 16 controls. And the other two important is supply chain management, 14. And here we will also look at API controls. A lot of risk assessments that we see do not include API and cloud risks, even if they are dealing with cloud environments. So I would urge companies, if you're into doing SOC reports for your organization, make sure you include the cloud security risks, which based on the CSA's top risks, and of course all the API risks which you may have data coming in and out of your organization or into your cloud platform. Endpoint management also has 14. So these are the some of the high level controls and high level based on the CCM4 domains, security domains. So when you implement the cloud security matrix, right, you're going to look at the cake as a first step, which is the questionnaire, which is also available for free from the CSA website. You're going to create a risk management capability and a matrix for your organization. You're going to look at all the CCM controls and scope for your application. You're going to write in the cake what is applicable, what is not applicable. It's not that it is applicable for you, and just because you have not implemented those controls, you will write not applicable. Please use the correct terminology. If it's applicable, write applicable. If it's not implemented, write not implemented. And what is the roadmap for implementation of those risks or those controls rather, right? So you can establish your governance objectives, you can establish your criteria, you can establish your risk um, uh, governance structures and what you need to report, answer all the questions, and once you are ready with the cake, which is a questionnaire as to what is implemented, what is not implemented, you can submit that to the CSS website, and there you can get onto a level 1 compliance. We will look at the level 1, level 2, level 3 compliance details shortly, but the cake is your first step to get into the level 1, and which is nothing but a questionnaire that you fill in and submit it to the CSA's website. So the steps to get onto the SOC 2 and CCM is first to have a project team. To After you get a management buy-in with the budgets, of course you will need the budget. You will need the manpower resources to get into the project. Once your budget is go ahead, you have a project team to manage the implementation. You will look at all the gaps into your environment based on the SOC 2 framework, which is a TSC framework, and of course the CCM framework both together. You will look at all your gaps. You will look at what you need to do, like the NIST provides you a current state or the target state assessment. You will do a current state assessment and do a gap analysis, what you need to implement. And then you will need to get the buy-ins from all the stakeholders as to what each of them needs to do, right? And then once you have a clarity, you create an implementation plan, and then you review the plan to look at your total what you say contribution, or total what you say is total efforts in the space, and your timelines as to when you start and when are you going to try and finish this. Then once you have implemented all those controls, you will look at reviewing whether the controls have been implemented, are correctly implemented, tested, right? You will look at the results of those implementation. You will need to make changes to if the implementation is incorrect, fine tune them, and then if there are any areas of improvement, you will highlight them, and you will carry out a PDCA cycle to carry out an impact assessment and start measuring your ROI from the time you have implemented all your controls, right? That is how you will implement any security controls in any organization. As we said, the CSA STAR leverages the trust services criteria. It is mandatory for you to have either the SOC 2 Type 2 and the CCM controls as part of the scope and part of the attestation report, or you could also choose the ISO 27001 route with the CCM controls being part of the statement of applicability, right? So this is what CSA STAR says. There are only two methods where you can get a CSA STAR level 2 compliance. One with ISO 27001 route plus the CCM, which leads to the CSA STAR certification, and the SOC 2 route with the CCM 4, which leads to the CSA STAR attestation. Why this attestation? Because the SOC 2 is not an audit. SOC 2 is an attestation. And that is the reason we use the term attestation for SOC 2, and we use the term certification when it is a ISO 27001 certification, right? So once you have a cake level 2, level 1, you will get the SOC 2 plus CCM version 4 SOC 2, and then we will go through the steps to get into the SOC level 2 compliance. You could also use a SOC 2 type 1 report to get into the to the level 2. You need not have a type 2 report only. However, the if you go with the SOC 2 type 1 route, you have 6 months to get into the SOC 2 Type 2 and submit your Type 2 report to the CSA to get a 1 year validity. Otherwise, your SOC report is valid for 1 year with CSA. But if you choose to do the Type 1, you have 6 months to get into the Type 2 report and get a 1 year validity. So here again, the attestation based on SOC 2 Type 1 is valid only for 6 months, right? Because it's only talking of design of controls and implementation of controls, and doesn't talk about the operating effectiveness of controls. So we saw this, the Type 1 report is as of a date, whereas the SOC 2 Type 2 report is for the period of time, which is the minimum 6 months to a 1 year's time, right? However, the CSA gives you 18 months to give you an updated report. So 12 months is the minimum time, plus there could be 1 or 2 months of extra time which they give you, but maximum you will have to replace your SOC 2 report within 18 months from the submission of to CSA website. So why CSA STAR? CSA STAR is being recognized as an international harmonized GRC framework for the cloud environment, and it is the most well accepted cloud services security and privacy compliance tool in the market today. Now, if you see on the right hand side, your star level 1, then the star level 1 is continuous, which is a self assessment again. The star level 2 is again based on the ISO 27001 or the SOC 2, which we just discussed. The star level 2 is continuous monitoring of those environments, which specifically SOC 2 you are doing to a certain extent. And then the CSA is also coming with star level 3 measurement, which is based on the metrics, which is still not yet published. It is still in research and development stage. Now, Cloud CSA STAR, Cloud Security Alliance has got about 400 corporate members. We are one of them. It has got about 30 active working groups. It's got 107 chapters worldwide. It's got 115,000 individual members. As an individual member, I am also one of the member since the year 2014. And since the time I did my CCSK with cloud in the year 2015, I'm an active member, contributing to the CSA as a community, as part also of as being a corporate member. We also try to provide our feedback into these CSA frameworks in terms of security that is being used by everybody. So the STAR stands for Security, Trust, Assurance, and Risk, which is also a registry by CSA STAR, also known as the STAR Registry from Cloud Security Alliance, right? So if you're trying to achieve that, it's important for us to know what the STAR stands for. Security, Trust, Assurance, and Risk Framework by Cloud Security Alliance. The STAR program, right, it talks about the CCM4 controls. CCM controls version 4 is the most updated one. It also is aligned to the some of the frameworks, which is the NIST framework, the the Trust Services Framework, which is also the ISO 27000 framework. So most of the well-known frameworks are aligned, right, to the STAR program. And of course, you have the Assurance Transparency Registry, where you submit your status, which is level 1 or level 2. So today there are more than 1,500 companies who are already submitted with Cloud Security Alliance, either on level 1 or level 2, and that number is growing year by year basis. So for a quick recap, star level 1 is self-assessment. You file a cake and you submit to the CSA website, right? Star level 1 is continuous. You continuously monitor your controls in your environment. The green one is the star level 2. Attestation is the SOC 2 route, and the certification, which is the ISA route, and you get to a star level 2 compliance. The star level 2 continuous is your continuous self-assessment and monitoring. But in case of a SOC 2, you're using a third party to do the continuous monitoring as part of the operating effectiveness of controls. And then level 3, I just told you, it's still in the research and development stages, and will be shortly coming up. CSA will be coming up shortly with some details on that. I think this is a recap. CSA Star attestation we just discussed. CSA Star certification we discussed. CSA Star is specifically built for the China model, and they also have some GDPR and third-party assessment-based certifications, which are still to come up, which is coming up in 2022 from CSA perspective. So why CSA Star? To objective is to reduce risk, to be consistent within the organization, to avoid conflicting objectives, to improve internal and external communications, to avoid duplication and gain cost savings, identify and resolve conflicting responsibilities and relationships, gain a structural balance of authority and accountability, focus organization into business goals, absorb informal systems into formal systems, harmonize and optimize practices, optimize staff training and development. This has been taken from CSA website. So this is not from SEDR. So whatever CSA Star wanted us to portray, we have been portraying that in this slide. So what you need to get yourself listed on the Star registry, right? Your organization name, which is your entity name, legal entity name. Then what is the contact and the name, who's the person responsible for the security and compliance and coordination with Cloud Security Alliance. Then your link of your website, what is the link of your website? You will need that. What is the description of your organization, the cloud service name, what are you attesting on to? So the organization may have specific cloud applications or PaaS services or specific infrastructure as a service, whatever the case may be. You will need to list down for what service are you getting listed onto the Star registry. And then the brief description of the services what you are providing in terms of the cloud security registry itself. Coming to attestation and registration with CSA as one of the final slides. What are the steps, right? The first step is we discussed to have a self-assessment, which is the cake, submitting it to CSA's website, step 1. Step 2 is the whole questionnaire, right? So you will fill out the questionnaire, you do self-assessment. And step 3 is actually submitting into registry. And step 4 is that you will need to prepare for SOC 2 or ISO in case you're going with the ISO route against the CCM. You will hire an auditor like us, right? You will do your internal implementations. You will get it reviewed by an auditor, and then you will finally get your audit certificate in terms of ISO and an attest report in terms of SOC 2, right? Which is step 5, and the step 6 is what you will promote after submission to the CSA registry. You will promote it on with the logo on your website that's your CSA Star level 2 compliant, etc., etc. So that is the whole objective for you to portray to your customers that you are doing what is required in terms of best practices, which is SOC 2 and these cloud security controls framework, which is a CCM 4 framework, and that you want to give an assurance to your customers that you are following those best practices. And from a type 2 perspective, you're portraying that not only do you have implemented those controls, but all of these controls are operating effectively in your environment every year when you do a SOC 2 type 2 on a year-to-year basis. So the whole idea of getting the SOC 2 and the CSA star is to be transparent, right, to your customers, to what you have in terms of what are the controls. So this SOC 2 works like a security white paper in your organization for your specific cloud services. Unlike an ISO 27001 certificate, which only is a certificate talks about your cloud specific services or your entity services that you have been taken for the scope of the entire ISO certification. If you give that ISO certificate to your clients, they don't know anything about what is the actual controls that you have implemented, or are they working effectively or not. It is just a certificate that you are following the ISO best practices. But if I want to know what is that you use for data encryption at rest, right? The ISO certificate does not provide that. However, the SOC 2 reports do provide that you use a AES 256-bit encryption for data security at rest, or whatever is that you're using, right? So all of these detailed controls are mentioned in a SOC 2 report, right, which is attested by an auditor. That is the reason the SOC 2 has more weightage, it provides more trust, it provides more better assurance than even the ISO certificate, right? So if you want it to be in the competition and you want to gain an edge over your competition, SOC 2 Type 2 is your best bet, right? It is you putting your best foot forward in terms of being transparent, in terms of uh, being fair, and getting the trust of your customers as to what exactly have you implemented. Many organizations also spend a lot of time going back and forth on emails. Okay, whether this is implemented, whether that's implemented, and whether they want to come and audit your environments or not, right? So this provides a very clear-cut, description of controls and the auditor's attestation into the trust services criteria as to what are the exact controls implemented, what the auditor has validated, and whether there were any issues with those controls or not. So SOC 2 also always provides a better assurance and better clarity, better trust. And today it's a marketing tool for many of the organizations to use as a trust for their security posture with their customers, right? So we as a CPA firm do the end-to-end attestation for the client. So if you engage with us, you need not hire anybody consultant for doing this for you, unless you can do it yourself. So if you're able to do it yourself, you hire us. We will direct you, we will help you, we will tell you how to you need to implement the controls at your end. And I would suggest not to engage too many parties where there are communication gaps as to what you should be doing and how you should be doing, right? So as part of our services to the clients, we do a gap assessment as part of our audits, and we do help our clients verbally to tell them what they should be doing in terms of getting into the uh, compliance stage in terms of the auditing. Of course, being an audit firm, we will not be able to implement those controls, but I think that every company has most of the companies have their internal resources to use them. And in case you have a shortfall, you can always get hold of somebody short term with our guidance to do those implementation of controls, right? Again, a disclaimer that whatever I have said today was based on my general understanding of the people in scope, and it is not addressed for any specific organization or any specific use case. So whatever I said is only general in nature and may not be applicable to your specific environment, right? So that's a disclaimer. And in case you need our specific services, you can always reach us on info@sed.io, and you can also always find us on LinkedIn and YouTube and other Google search parameters. So now I go back to Alva to do the polls and to do the question answer session with you guys.
Yes. So I'll just start the polls right now. There are just 3 questions, and you can already see that I have started the polls. So it'll just take 2 minutes. Please quickly, just answer the polls. And also, Simon, once you're done with the polls, you can move to the Q&A box and please put in your questions there. Any questions you have regarding this webinar. And once you all are done with the poll, we are done with the polls, we'll begin with the Q&A. So there are 3 questions for the polls. Just please, it'll be great if you guys can answer all 3 of them, and then we can just begin with the Q&A. Some of you guys have still not done the poll. Please just finish the poll. We'll wait for a minute more and then we'll move on to the Q&A.
So while we are doing the polls, I'll quickly, I think, Alva, can we do the question because we only have
Yes.
10 minutes left, right? So
Okay.
let me start with the question. So first question is, does the attestation with CSA Alliance is valid only for 18 months since the submission? So if you see the SOC 2 Type 2 report, right? The Type 2 report needs to be refreshed every 12 months. So the type 2 validity is only 12 months, right? So any SOC 2 type 2 report for any organization is valid for maximum 12 months, right? But sometimes it takes a little more time to for the sign off, and because the reporting period is 12 months, so it may take 1 or 2 months extra for getting the final report on hand, right? Because there is a process of signatures and fine tuning and management assertion, etc after the reporting period is over. So they need to make a draft report and final report, etc. So sometimes on an average, it may take 1 month to 3 months time to get the final signed SOC 2 type 2 report after the period is over, right? So because the 12 months is the maximum timeline of a type 2 report, you have to refresh the report with CSA every 18 months if it's a SOC 2 type 2. If it's an ISO certificate is valid for 3 years. So I don't think that would be the case in case of ISO. However, you need to do a surveillance audit for ISO, but SOC 2 Type 2, every 12 months, you need to take a SOC 2 Type 2 report. So I hope that answers that question. The second question is, we implement CIS controls. Is there a mapping from CIS to CCM? So to my understanding, CIS is benchmarking of baselines, etc. I'm not sure if there is any mapping to CCM controls. However, you can check on CSA Cloud Security Alliance website. If there's a mapping, it would be there in the latest CCM4 version. So you download the CCM4 version, and if it is there, I haven't checked it or I mean offline in the last 3-4 weeks, but I'm sure they always keep updating that. So if you download the CCM version 4 from the Cloud Security website, you will see all the mappings, whatever are there. It's free download. You don't have to pay for it. Just register on CSA website, download it, and see all the mappings that are available. But I'm not sure if there's a CIS mapping to the CCM as of now. So third question is, we are a small company, only 3 people. Is SOC 2 an option? Or are we going into phases? Phase issue of separation of responsibilities. How is this addressed? So to answer that question, if you are only few people, 3 people or so, even large environments or well-known, I would say environments, not large environments like Airbnb. Right, when I was attending the Amazon conference, and I was given the example of Airbnb, which was doing business of the hotels and other properties being rented out on small time basis. So I was told that Airbnb has only 7 employees, right? And all the 7 employees were working round the clock to manage that platform. So it's not about number of employees, it is about the controls that you take care of, right? And in a cloud environment, and if you're a SaaS company, the majority of the controls at the data center layer or the infrastructure layer are taken care by either Amazon or Google or Azure, depending on what platform are you on, right? So there is a only the application part that you need to take care, and that's slightly easier than taking care of the entire data security and the IAS controls per se, right? So a lot of those controls for SaaS companies are not applicable, which are typically applicable to IAS companies. So the number of people do not matter. Even if you are less than 10, like specifically like Airbnb, you can be SOC 2 compliant and you can go in for a SOC 2. Because that gives, as I said earlier, that gives more transparency. It gives the details of the controls that you have implemented. It's more transparent, right? And it saves a lot of your time to go back and forth to your clients, specifically into if you're into the B2B segment, right? All of these larger clients want to know what are the controls implemented, right? And to my knowledge, a lot of these back and forth emails take a lot of time to answer and to specifically to address all of these several stakeholders. So if you are sharing a SOC 2 Type 2 report, majority of these issues are taken care of. You only share a SOC 2 report, and all the controls are listed, right? So only what is not listed, right? Those companies would come back to. And if you see a 100 and odd page report, there is a major chance that most of the companies even don't read those SOC 2 reports, what is the controls implemented, and they would accept your SOC 2 report as is, rather than you going back and forth on emails. So any more questions? I had only 3 questions.
Yeah.
And
Do we have any other questions?
so I think if there are no more questions, we will close this session. And I believe there'll be a recording. However, you have a recording available for this, right? It will be going to everybody.
Yes, it will
So
be
can
sent
you
to
elaborate? Can you elaborate on that?
Sorry?
Can you elaborate and can you inform everybody on that?
Yeah, so we have recorded this session, and once this session is completed, then everybody will be getting the recording of this session. So if you want to like refer to it, or if you've missed out on anything, you can always go back and you can see that recording. It will be available to everybody who's attended this webinar and even the ones who've missed out. Yeah. I think we don't have any other questions. So
I think thank you everybody for joining, and thank you
thank
wherever
you.
you in this part of this world. And I appreciate your time you have taken. We'll be there to help you in case you need anything. Please get back to us, send us an email, and we'll see what best we can do for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.